Hello and welcome to Bharat Shakti. I'm Brigadier Chatterjee. We're going to be talking about navigating through this huge transition that is right ahead in the United States as far as we Indians are concerned. And this transition, we will refer to only the defense and security issues. How should we at best transit across the change that is going to be there in the American leadership? We know that this election is just about a couple of days away. And there are actually two basic issues that I want to go into. The first issue is how's our relationship now with the United States? And secondly, how do we transit across this new administration which will come in to maintain the relationship, maintain the pace at which it's been moving of late? To discuss this, I have with me Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja. The General Officer has been with the Integrated Defense Staff. He was the Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff, and in his appointment, he's dealt with militaries of a lot of nations, and of course, the United States. He's also been the co-chair of the DTTI, which gives him a deeper exposure, I would say, into the Indo-US relations gambit. Welcome, General. Welcome to Bharat Shakti.
Thank you, Brigadier Chatterjee. Pleasure being with you.
Right, General, we had actually had an interview between you and me on the 2nd of August, if I recall, and we did talk about the Indo-US relationship, the defense and security aspects then also. But now we have a slightly different setting, and I thought I will bank on your knowledge and experience to generate certain answers about how to navigate through this transition, which is right ahead of this relationship. So, with your long experience, looking at Indo-US relationship, I would say, and the change of administration which is going to be there in United States, how do you think we should be really positioning ourselves?
See, we, like you mentioned, a few months back when we had interacted, we'd had a closer look at the state of relationship as it exists at present. And now, as we are coming close to the elections, early November, uh, that there will be a change in the White House beginning 2025 is a given. Who will be the next incumbent? Kamala Harris, Trump? None of us knows. But irrespective of who the new incumbent is, there will be things that will largely remain the same. The overall trajectory, the trend of relationship, and there are nuances which will definitely change. So, what we could be looking at is what is likely to be the magnitude of the change. So, my focus would be to highlight and mutually assess between ourselves the magnitude of the change. Now, if the Democrats come back, I see that the current character and pattern of partnership is likely to continue. We have certain important projects in hand. Uh, I see them transitioning smoothly. For example, we have this ongoing acquisition of MQ-9 drones, delivery of remaining 6 Apaches for the Indian Army, hopefully expedited delivery of G404 engines, which have been delaying our LCA Mark I. Our cooperation for the co-production of G414, since we've been talking about it since last year's Prime Minister's visit to the US, and the overall emphasis that has come in the recent times on technology, innovation, defense industrial cooperation. Now, this trend is likely to continue, and I do not see any major disruptions taking place. In the event of Republican administration coming to the office, well, at the outset, we all realize that there is a bipartisan consensus on the US side, quite like on our side, about the India US relationship. So I don't see any serious hiccups emerging in the relationship. But then the Trump's characteristic unpredictability. It may be naive to assume that Trump 2.0 would be like Trump 1.0, where we had quite a successful and quite a smooth relationship, including in the field of defense. Now, where I see the things continuing to remain the same is like in the field of mill to mill cooperation, our exercises, visits, etc., etc. They are likely to continue unhindered. But in the field of defense, trade, technology, industrial cooperation, I sense that there may be some greater element of transactional relationship coming into it. So we should be prepared for certain amount of changes if Trump comes into the office.
Right, you're talking about this transactional issue. I also consider it as a real issue. So, could you just elaborate a little more on what are the areas that will really have an influence on trade technology, like you said, any more areas, and in trade technology, anything in particular you have in mind, Jan?
See, what I said was I primarily categorized this defense relationship into two parts. One, like I said, is mill to mill exercises. You have this Yuddha Abhyas, Cope India, Vajra Prahar, Tiger Triumph, many of these Malabar exercise, many of these exchange of military visits, etc., etc. They will remain. Perhaps I feel that the scope in them may deepen with the effort to enhance our interoperability. The second part that I said, which you've asked me to amplify, is that uh, where I see the differences cropping up. We've been talking of defense trade, we've been talking of industry cooperation. Last year, in June, we had the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, visiting us, June 2023, and we finalized a defense industrial cooperation roadmap. Now, this entails fast tracking technical cooperation by removing certain regulatory barriers or lowering them, making certain concessions in export controls, and focusing on co development of new technologies and co production of defense products, doing them in India. Now, this entails a lot of give and take, which may be subjected to a different yardstick should Trump come into office. Then we have this very recently when our Raksha Mantri went to the US in end of August. We concluded a security of supply arrangement, commonly being referred to as SOSA. Now, uh, then we are talking of the reciprocal defense procurement agreement. Now, these have a direct impact on our own capability development as well as for our industry. It has an impact related to enhancing our defense exports. Now, in the event of Trump returning, I sense this relationship getting more transactional, and some contradictions may get highlighted because, on one side, you have Build and Buy America initiative in the US, where they are trying to enhance the acquisitions, indigenous acquisitions, to build in America, to buy from America. And we have our aspiration of self-reliance of Atmanirbharta. So now this is something where we may have certain transaction related issues. The next aspect is that in the field of iCET, Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. Now, this is hugely relevant to national security, and it extends beyond defense cooperation per se.
And
There
I would
may
say
be there may
and I
be
would say
certain
it is actually running very well. It's actually running very well, I said, whatever
yes,
inputs that we have.
I totally agree with you that the scope, like you have mentioned correctly, the scope is extending beyond defense per se. It's gone to space, semiconductors, advanced telecommunications, AI, quantum, critical materials, clean energy, issues related to other defense technologies. And under its umbrella, within defense, we have this initiative. You've been hearing this of INDUS, defense acceleration ecosystem, challengings for identifying talent, impact challenges, etc. So we have, since it's going on well, you mentioned, in less than 2 years, we've got investments worth nearly $2 billion plus in our semiconductor industry. So it's initiative like these which have been the characteristic of our engagement during Biden administration. And this is where we are cooperating to bridge the technology gap. So honestly, when I look at it, any incumbent coming into office should realize that this is what will help India and US bridge the technology gap, industrial gap. So I think it should not change much. But then this is an area where we could apprehend something.
Right. Let me get to the next issue. You mentioned about SOSA, that's that security of supply arrangement that we've going into rather with the Americans, and also the reciprocal defense agreement. Could you just elaborate a little more on these issues?
Yes. Now, SOSA, this is an agreement that we have concluded. This arrangement we have concluded during RM's recent visit. Reciprocal defense procurement. Now, this is something which is being negotiated. Let me try and amplify a little. This security of supply arrangement, this is designed to strengthen defense resource availability and to give resilience to our supply chain, both for India as well as for the US. Now, this arrangement, let's take a note of it. This is a non binding arrangement, and it calls for both sides that we should explore uh, how we will give priority supply of defense goods and services during peacetime, during emergency, during armed conflict. If we try and relate it to what's happening, let's say there is a delay today in US supplying us G404 engines. So if under this SOSA arrangement, we can work with the US, we can work with G through the US government to expedite the delivery of these items. This just to illustrate the point. Now, inherent in this, we must understand is a degree of mutual independence, and there is an underlying thought of promoting interoperability. US has concluded this with 18 countries, including India, and this arrangement, in conjunction with the reciprocal defense procurement agreement, will open greater opportunities for our defense industry. So that is as far as SOSA is concerned. And as far as reciprocal defense procurement MOU, or RDP as it is normally referred, now this calls for cooperation in R&D, production of defense equipment, and reciprocal procurement of defense items. Now, like SOSA, I said, was non binding, but RDP is a binding international agreement which puts certain obligations on both the parties. Now, that SOSA I mentioned, they've signed with 18 countries, and this they have signed with, I think, 28 countries. The recent one with the Republic of Korea is under negotiations. Now, one very specific aspect here is that with whichever country the RDP is signed, there is a mutual commitment not to discriminate against the supplier or the other country. Now, I had made a mention of Buy America Act. Like we have in our acquisition procedure, we have a stipulation that about 40% content should be indigenous. US had a provision till of nearly 55% indigenous content. Very recently, it has been enhanced to 65%. And from January 2029, it is likely to increase to 75%. But the beauty is that whatever is procured from countries which have signed RDP, that is considered indigenous. Okay, this has been procured from within America only. So this gives a lot of access for defense exports to our industry. So on the positive side, it will open up opportunities for Indian defense industry, our private industry, MSMEs, etc. But on the flip side, it may create a challenge of according priority to defense procurements from the US and perhaps even the expectation of a non competitive access to our market. So we must balance both the sides. And this is not a standard agreement, this is country specific. So the contents of each RDP with A, B, or C country will be different.
So obviously, this transition in the United States of leadership is extremely important for us. We would like SOSA also to continue and RDP also to be well structured such
To
and
be nuanced and done to meet both the requirements.
both the requirements. So, how do you think we should go about influencing during this transition and post this transition?
See, first of all, uh, that we have to nuance this transition is important. I'm consciously not using the word managed transition because in case of India and US, we have too multifaceted, too deep and complex relationship to be managed. But yes, we have to look at it and nuance it in a manner that we avoid turbulence and we make the transition smooth. I very vividly recall the efforts that went into bridge the transition in 2016 when in the waning years of Trump 2 or in the waning years of Obama 2 administration. Uh, Serious efforts were made by both sides in 2016 to bridge this transition smoothly. That time, our side, we had Defense Minister Shri Manohar Parrikar, and on the US side, we had Secretary Ashton Carter. And the people on both sides had invested in deepening this relationship. You would recall that was the time when we had this DTTI came up, major defense partner. India became a major defense partner that time. We concluded LIMOA, Logistic Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, and certain foundation was set up for subsequent foundational agreements. Now, the outgoing US administration, they tried to formalize this. That whosoever comes to office, that time they didn't know whether Hillary Clinton was going to come to office or Trump was going to come to office. But they thought whatever has been achieved between the two countries, let's formalize it. So most of it was formalized in their National Defense Authorization Act of 2017. This very famous section, which is quoted very often, Section 1292 of NDA 2017, Enhancing Defense and Security Cooperation with India. Now, it formalized major defense partner status. And there are certain concessions, there are certain arrangements between our countries that have got formalized irrespective of who comes to office. And that time, again, it was just a coincidence. The defense minister visited US between 29th and 31st August 2016. And that was the time when this MDP, LIMOA, etc. got formalized. So there was an effort made to make the transition smooth, and this perhaps helped us across transition. And similar thing doing now would be helpful.
No, I quite agree with you. I mean, this kind of formalizing the whole issue during the stage of transition or just before transition does help a lot, of perhaps. It does give a lot of assurance. The assurance level is increased. Any other historical example that you can possibly give us of this thing being arranged so well, the transition
Well,
being handled?
let's look at it. Let's look at the next transition from Trump to the Biden administration. I recall, I think if I'm not wrong about the date, it was 27th October 2020. Just barely a week before the US elections were due, we we had our 2 plus 2 dialogue. The third 2 plus 2 dialogue was held. And certain things, we that year in 2020, we had formalized this comprehensive global strategic partnership. This got formalized when President Trump had visited India that year. Then we had greater deliberation on DTTI, deeper engagement between our innovation organization, Defense Innovation Unit on the US side, Defense Innovation Organization on the Indian side, industry cooperation, industrial security annex, etc. Now, these got formalized just when the transition was underway, and it set the pace. Even now, just look back, uh, just about 4 months back, we had Jake Sullivan and Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, who came here in June this year for the second review of iCET. In August, last week of August, we had our own Raksha Mantri visiting the US. And the third edition of the Indus X Summit was held just last month, 9th, 10th September, at Stanford University. Now, these are the things, and of course, we've had the recent visit of Prime Minister to the US, although it was for the Quad Summit, for the UN Summit for the future, but then we had bilateral engagements. So, what has happened is you look at it, there is an effort on both sides so that we ensure that there is least turbulence and there is greater continuity across administrations.
All right. Let me inject a little controversial issue. We've had this BRICS summit and we've had some on the side engagement between the two leaders of India and China also. And a certain amount of ice, the thaw in the ice is there along eastern Ladakh borders. Now, our being in BRICS or developing a far warmer relationship, not far warmer, a slightly warmer relationship, a thaw in the relationship with the Chinese. And of course, the relationship between, I would say, our Prime Minister and Mr. Putin as such. Don't these things get to create some sort of a hurdle in Indo-US relationship, transition, or otherwise even that?
See, I've also noted some comments on social media made on the picture. There was a picture where our Prime Minister and President Putin were meeting. They were embracing each other, and there were certain apprehensions, and I quote, I underscore on social media, not in any official media. There are apprehensions over India's warm relations with Russia, India normalizing its relations with China. All I wish to say is that India's relations with US and India's relations with Russia or if people take China equation also. Now, these are not a zero sum relationship. They they have their own place and they are independent of each other. Uh, about our Russia relationship, this aspect has been clarified to the US side a number of times, and I think our friends across understand the rationale of this relationship. Now, as regards the Thaw in India China relationship, let's look back. A similar engagement pattern has been followed between US and China also, whether it was last year or this year. US and China last year, their presidents met at Woodside, California, mid November on the sidelines of APEC. There have been high level exchange of visits. Secretary Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, uh, the Commerce Secretary. I mean, they've all visited. So, because uh, you have to manage this relationship, it doesn't suggest any volte face in policies, neither on the American side nor in the Indian side. And I'm sure our friends would realize this. And this is something where you have to manage a relationship with a neighbor. So I think with our understanding, with the depth of relationship, this should be viewed in correct perspective. And social media has its own place. Let it be there where it is.
One last question, General, and that's about this broad spectrum of stakeholders in the Indo-US relationship. This seems to be growing. It's grown to now include students, academics, and also research and development people, us business in any case. So, what do you have to say about that?
See, we have we have moved well beyond engagement between government to government or military to military. Today, the stakeholders of this relationship, even in the field of defense and security per se, includes innovators, young entrepreneurs, private defense industry, academia, think tanks, investors. Now, this broad constituency adds to the ballast of this relationship, and it takes it beyond the plug in, plug out kind of relationship. That relationship runs SAR, you cancel and excise. Now, that's plug in, plug out relationship. But with so many stakeholders, there's a better understanding, there's a deeper engagement. I also mentioned that over the years, there's a better understanding of our rationale with the Russia relationship. And we have shown a greater degree of maturity, of keeping our relationship in key areas largely insulated from the turbulence that prevails. uh, Last couple of days, again, we've been hearing intensified statements on issues like Pannu and various other, issues of little discord. But fortunately, we have made sure that our core relationships, our central pillars remain insulated. And I'm hopeful that irrespective of which administration takes office in January 2025, this positive trend will continue and our deeper understanding and relationship will be maintained, and we'll be able to firewall our core areas of relationship from the happenings and the turbulence around us. That's my hope, that's my wish.
I think everyone, all of us here are with you. We do hope the relationship gets stronger and stronger. And let's finish on that note, General. Thank you so much for having spared your time and joined us on our platform at Bharat Shakti. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure interacting with you. Thank you.
And thank you, viewers. Thanks for joining us on Bharat Shakti. Do join in like this now and then, and you'll find discussions and subjects of importance for you. Thank you.